Hello and welcome to the shop. Today I want to start working on an idea that I have had for probably 6, maybe 8 months. And the biggest issue I had with this idea and why I didn't attempt it sooner is the material, the proper material to use. I want to turn the cap, the center band, and the nib. I want to turn my own parts. I don't want to use the parts that come with the kit. And the issue I was having is what wood would be the best to use. Now you want a nice hard wood, one that's easy to work with. And I was thinking maybe like African blackwood, but the problem is it's so dark and I really wanted a lighter material for those 3 components. About 3 weeks ago or so, Bob McClellan contacted me on Facebook and was telling me that he purchased a large amount of Corian and he'd like to send me a little bit just to see what I did with it. And I told him that sounds great. I mean, I'm always open to new materials. I like to try new materials. And he sent me a box of Corian, and I'll show you a shot of it here in a second. And there were quite a few different colored pieces in there. I was driving home last week and it hit me. Man, this Corian is perfect. It's a good material to work with. It's solid. It's lighter color, which is what I was looking for. And so the idea came back and it was like, let's go ahead and give this a try. And that's what I'm going to start on today. I've already kind of got myself set up, so I'll take a couple of minutes, show you what I've got, where I'm at, and then we're going to go ahead and start turning the nib for this particular pen. Here's a quick shot of the Corian Bob sent me, and just look at all the great colors. I chose this piece of wood. Now this is a cutoff from a wine glass holder I'm making, and I chose this piece of wood to make the pen out of. And I took a photo and put a teaser photo over on Instagram. And by the way, if you guys aren't subscribed to me, I am now on Instagram. I'll put the Instagram address on the screen. I had shown this piece of white in the photo I took. And I got to thinking, the white looks good, but it's really a stark white. This color here, I think kind of goes really well with this blank. So I've chosen this color to be my nib, cap, and center band. With my calipers, I found the size of the hole down the center of the nib, and it turned out to be 3/16 of an inch. So I grabbed a bit, and then I found the size of the hole on the back side, and that turned out to be 13/64, and I grabbed a bit for that. And I got to thinking, this thing sort of tapers a little bit, number one. And number two, if I use this bit, look how thin I'm going to have to turn the Corian. So I decided to back off a little bit, and I went with a 1/8 inch bit. And the 1/8 inch bit, it leaves a lot of play so I can have a thicker collar down here on the nib, but it fits nicely down into the nib, so it'll taper nicely. So what I'll have is a 1/8 inch hole all the way down through the nib, and then at the end I'll have my 3/16 hole, and I think that the ink cartridge or the ink refill should move nicely back and forth through the hole at the end of the pen. 1/8 inch is larger than the ink refill, so I think everything should fit and work nicely. I chucked up the Corian on my lathe using my pen jaws in my Novichok, and I brought a 60-degree live center up just to give it some stability. I want to start by just truing this up. I used a 3/4 inch roughing gouge to true that blank up, and I ran my lathe wide open. What I want to do next is I've got a 3/16 inch bit chucked up in my Jacob's chuck, and I'm going to go ahead and drill a hole as far into the blank as my bit will allow. I'll be drilling at the absolute slowest speed the lathe will spin. Let's talk a little bit about this blowout. This was completely my fault. I had brought the tailstock up because I had fully extended the Jacob's chuck where my tailstock was initially locked, and I wanted to drill farther into the blank. By bringing it up, I started to move into the blank, and I went about a half of an inch, maybe a little more than a half of an inch into the blank. I probably should have gone about a quarter, backed it off, cleared it out, and then gone back in. What happens when you don't clear the bit often is it builds up a bunch of material, and that material starts to swell, and it's heating up the inside of the blank, and materials like Corian and some woods, they just don't hold up real well. They explode. I see this with acrylics as well. So be sure, don't make the same mistake I just made. Be sure to clear your flights as often as possible. Now, I'm not really hurt. I'm going to go get a little saw. We're going to cut it off right here at the end of the split, and then I'll bring the tailstock back up and we'll drill into the back half of this blank, and we'll be able to finish this project with that. The other thing I'm going to do to try to help with the situation is I've taken my tailstock completely out of the way. I'm going to hold the Jacob's chuck in my hand. We'll be able to find the center and start it. This will make it a little bit easier for pulling it out of the blank and clearing the bit. I won't have to wait to back it out with the crank handle. So let's go ahead and get our hole drilled. We let it find center. You can see all the material coming out on the drill bit. And that's what caused the problem last time. I'm going maybe a quarter of an inch in each time, and then I'm bringing the bit out and clearing it. And you can see just how much material. With these bits, they cut at the tip and they're flat down here, so the material can't continue up the shaft and exit. So that's why we need to clear it often. All right, much better. I've reversed my blank in the chuck, and what I want to do now is go ahead and remove this back section. I can see where the hole went through the blank right there. I'm going to go ahead and make sure it's level, and it is. And now what I want to do is begin shaping my nib. I've made a couple of marks on my blank, and they correspond to my nib, and you can see this will be the tip, and then this mark back here is where the collar starts. What I want to do now is just take my parting tool, and I'm going to use my calipers, and we're going to take this collar down to the same size as this collar. I've got a good fit all the way up to the edge of the sleeve, and I came in at a little bit of an angle and sort of undercut that sleeve just a tiny bit. What I want to do now is we're going to get our measurement for the largest piece of the nib, and as well as the smallest piece, and we'll put some measurements at either end so that we can sort of taper from top to bottom to get as close to this shape as we possibly can. For the top end, we're relatively close. We just need to take a little bit off, so we'll go ahead and clean that up real quick. I stopped myself. And the reason why, I've already drilled a 3/16 inch hole up the middle of this blank. If I take this down to the dimension of the tip of the nib, I'm going to be super thin down at the tip, and it's going to be very difficult for me to shape this. I want to shape this first, especially the top part, clean it up as I go, and hopefully we'll get right down to the end. We'll put a polish on it, and then we'll cut it off. What I want to do now is, you'll see there's a little chip right there. Okay, that's a saw mark. The back of my collar only needs to come to there. So we're going to pull this out of the way. We're going to clean this collar up. We're going to drill our 1/8 inch hole through the nib, and then we'll come back and start shaping. I've used a piece of blue painter's tape to put a depth stop on my nib. That's all the farther in that we want to go. Because I don't have much of a grip in my jaws, I'm just going to use a piece of 120 grit sandpaper and attempt to sand this flat. That worked out really nice. Just using my parting tool and holding the sandpaper against it, that gave me a nice flat surface, and I was able to sand that really beautifully smooth. Let's go ahead and get our hole drilled up the center. I've brought my tailstock back up for some additional support, and I'm just going to use a 1/4 inch detailing gouge and come in and start working this down towards a point. I'm having a little bit of problem, and that is the Corian. As I start to work down toward the tip, I'm pushing it into the jaws. I'm not able to grip such a tiny end piece as tightly as I would like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and seat this in the jaws. I'm going to bring the tailstock up to make sure that I've got it centered properly. I'm going to go ahead and tighten the jaws down as best as I can. Let me loosen that up just a little bit and back off this tailstock. There we are. Okay. And I'm going to use a little hot melt glue. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to come in here at the jaws, and I'm going to put some hot melt glue on either side. And what I'm hoping that'll do is it'll sort of glue this piece of Corian to the chuck, and that will give me a little bit more rigidity so that I can work this piece without shoving it back into the chuck. There's not much to glue to out here on the front edge, but I'm going to try to get it into the chuck as best as I can. We'll let that dry, and hopefully that'll give us more bite. My hot glue has had a few minutes to dry. Let's see if this makes any difference. I'm really close to the shape that I want. This Corian sands very easily. I'm going to go ahead and sand this and get the best possible finish that I can on it. and then we'll come back and work the tip of the nib down and get it separated from the rest of the blank. I'm going to start off with 120 grit and work my way down through the grits, but I'm going to be real careful because this is pretty aggressive. I'm just going to do just a light surface sanding, and then as I get up to about the 340 grit or 320, whatever it is, I will be a little more aggressive with the last couple of grits. I've changed my game plan. This stuff sands so easily that I've decided to treat it like acrylic and go straight to micromesh, wet micromesh. But I'm going to do a couple of tests. I've got a bushing here, which is my standard bushing. I want to make sure that where the collar ends and the nib begins, that it fits comfortably against the bushing. And I've brought a tube over to make sure that the collar fits nicely inside the tube. So I'm going to do a couple of quick tests, then we're going to go to micromesh and get this thing cleaned up. The first test with the brass tube tells me that my collar is a little bit fat right up where the nib begins. I am going to use sandpaper for this and just take just ever so slight amount off of the top side of this. All right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm not having a whole lot of luck doing this. I'm going to go ahead and bring the tailstock up, and I'm going to bring the parting tool in, and I'm going to use the parting tool. What it is, when I undercut, I left a little bit of an angle on there. I'm going to come back in, and I'm going to start out with my undercut, then I'm going to straighten my tool up, and I should be able to knock that collar right off. Well, it looks like we're going to have to finish it by hand. We were so close down here that when I brought the tailstock up, it gave way on me. So what I'll do is I'll work this by hand. Let me get the sandpaper, and we'll get the tube to fit nicely. And once the tube fits nicely, we'll see what we can come up with for putting a finish on this. This may take a bit, so as I'm sanding this, I'll go ahead and shut the camera off. I won't make you watch me do this. I've cleaned this nib up to where it fits really nice on the brass tube. The other thing I've done is tested the ink refill, and that's all the farther through the nib comes, or the tip of the ink refill comes. That's actually perfect. I also wanted to show you that here's a bushing, a standard 7mm bushing, and I've got a really nice fit between the bushing and the nib, and this is where the wood will be turned down to, so that when this slides in, I should have a good fit or a good transition between my nib and my front blank. I think I may have come up with an idea. I've got this little stub that is still hot glued very tightly into my chuck. I'm going to go ahead and drill through it with this 1/8 inch bit. Once the bit gets through, I'll remove the tape. I'll push the bit all the way up until the smooth section at the back of the bit is all that's showing. I think I can seat this on the bit, bring the tailstock up to hold it in place, be able to shape that or round that off and put a finish on it. We're going to give this a try. I'm all the way through, and what I'm going to do now is remove the tape from this bit, and we'll get it out of the Jacob's chuck, and we'll go ahead and get it hot glued into this little hole we drilled. I've got the bit run through the hole, and I brought the tailstock up just to kind of center the bit at the end. And now I'm going to go ahead and apply a liberal amount of hot glue. We'll let that dry, and then we'll proceed with cleaning up the nib. My hot glue is set up, and when I turn the lathe on, you can see I'm spinning fairly true, so I'm really happy with that. What I want to do now is we're going to put the nib onto the drill bit, and I'm going to put a little bit of hot glue on the back of it just to hold it in place. I won't be doing any sanding on this little shoulder back here. That'll just get glued directly into the tube. but I do want to have it held as firmly as possible so that I can use my micro mesh pads and clean up the front half of the nib. I'm going to use a little 120 grit sandpaper to round over the nib, and once I get it rounded over, then I'm going to move to my micro mesh pads wet to sand up the Corian. All right, I'm happy with that. Let's move to the micro mesh pads. Here's the one from the kit, and as you can see, looks like I'm right at the same length, so I'm happy about that. I'm obviously a little bit fatter. I wished I could have got it down a little thinner, but this is the first one I've done. The next one I do, I'm sure will be better, but I'm very happy with how it's turning out so far. Let's get a little polish on this. I'm just using a little Plastex headlight polish. This is supposed to take scratches out of your vehicle's headlights. Really shined it up. I didn't want to get the Plastex on the shoulder, but I couldn't really help it. So when I take it off the lathe and get the hot glue cleaned off of it, I'll just take a piece of sandpaper, maybe like a 300 or 400 grit, and I'll just scuff that up a little bit so that my glue will adhere to it and glue it inside of the tube. Here's a shot of my nib compared to a kit nib, and it is a little bit larger. I'm not upset about that. The hole is centered on both sides, so I'm very happy about that. What I'm going to do now is lay this aside, and I'm going to bring back the original block that I had. It's a shame that I lost so much, but I'm going to go ahead and get this trued up, and we're going to turn a cap out of it. I'm working with a little less material than I thought I would be at this point, but that blowout earlier kind of cost me. I'm going to go ahead and true up the rest of this blank. We're going to attempt to turn a cap down here at the end, and then we'll come back and turn a center band a little farther up on this piece of Corian. Initially, I thought I might turn the cap first, but after thinking about it, I kind of feel like the center band may be more difficult since it's going to be a thinner piece. So I think I'm going to go ahead, I'll square the end of this blank up, and then I've got a 1/4 inch bit here, which I've mic'd it out with my calipers, is the exact interior dimension of the center band. So I'll go ahead and drill a hole in, maybe about this far, and I'll clean up both sides of the center band, get it parted off, or get it finished, get it parted off, and then we'll move on to the cap as the last part. Let's go ahead now and see if we can drill our hole. Let the bit find center. See how deep we are? We probably need to go a tiny bit deeper. That should do it. I grabbed the outer dimension of the trim ring, and I can see that I am not far from it. So I think what I'm going to do is use some sandpaper and I'll come back here and I'll make a mark where the end of the trim ring should be, and then I'll just use some sandpaper to kind of round this over and clean it up a little bit. And I just don't want to take too much away, because if it gets really thin, I'm afraid it won't hold up. So let's go that route. All I really want to do is bring this down to the proper dimension, and then we'll part it off. You see how that works? A little bit farther. I think we've got it at the front. We just need to take the back half down a little bit. Really happy with that. We are so close. Yeah, we're great. Let's go ahead now, and what I want to do is I'm going to polish this up with the micro mesh, and then we're going to come back and we're going to part this off. Building up a nice slurry, which means the micro mesh is doing its job. Looks really nice. Let's get our polish out and put a little polish on it. I want to get inside of the ring here, so let's see if we can wrap some around this little awl and get it in there. There we go. All right. Now we need to part that off. Trying to be real careful as we are starting to break through. There we go. All we need to do now is we'll take a little piece of sandpaper, we'll lay it on the lathe, and we'll rub this on it and get some polish on the back side. We got a little bit of an ear there, but that should come right off. Here's my trim ring. I'm really happy with how it turned out. I need a little bit of polish on the back side here, so I'm going to do that real quick, and then we'll get this laid aside and we'll do our cap. The first thing to do is to get the outer dimension of the blank down to the same outer dimension as a standard pen cap. So we're going to work on that. We've got a little bit of material to be removed. I think the cap looks really nice. I rounded it over. I didn't get this part on film, but I just took some 120 grit sandpaper and just sort of rounded over the sharp edge. And then I came in and hit it with the micro mesh, wet sanded it. What I want to do now is go ahead and get it parted off, and then with some 400 grit, we'll rough up the little shoulder here that's going to glue into our tube. The blanks that I initially planned on turning were Purple Heart and Poplar, and they were in grain, and I ended up, they were going along really well, and I had a bad blowout on the end down here, and instead of taking the time to fix them, I laid them aside to fix later, and I've gone ahead and grabbed a couple of cutoffs of some mahogany or some sapele, and I'm going to go ahead and turn this. The blank is not as important as the other pieces, so we're going to go ahead and turn this sapele. It should make a nice looking pen, and then we'll get everything assembled. So I'll be back in touch with you in a few minutes after I get this turned down to the bushings. I turned a couple of really nice blanks out of some scrap sapele, and I'm going to go ahead and assemble this pen, but I'm not going to put pressure or use the press for the parts made of Corian because I'm afraid it could damage them. What we are going to do is go ahead and press the transmission part of the way into the front tube. And then we're going to go ahead and install the ink cartridge, and I'm going to test to see how it looks. Looks like the transmission could stand to go just a little farther into the pen. So we're going to press it a little farther in. Put another block in here to take up a little bit of the slack. We're going to remove the ink cartridge. And I just want to give it just a tiny, tiny tap. There we go. Now we're going to test again. And I think that's about perfect. So what we'll do, we're going to lay this aside for just a second. And we're going to go ahead and prep the, well, actually what we're going to do is we're going to get our super glue and we're going to glue the Corian parts in. We won't need the press any longer. We're going to use a little medium CA. And what I'm going to do, we're going to take the ink refill out and we're going to attempt to put the CA inside of the tube. And the reason for that is I don't want the CA squishing out. There we go. I don't want the CA squishing out and getting all over everything. So by putting it in the tube, then I can assemble this. And I'm going to go get a little clamp and put a clamp on here. And the reason for the clamp is just to hold everything tightly until the CA can dry. Okay, we've got a nice fit. So we're just going to lay this aside. We'll insert our cap through our clip. And if I remember correctly, this one was a little bit tight, so I am going to try to press this one in. So I will grab the press and bring it back over to fit this. I want to be really careful with this. Line it up a little bit. I got it going in there crooked, and I don't need that. Oop. Having a real hard time keeping it straight. There we go. There we go. Now she's going in. Let's get our clip. Let's find a good spot for the clip. That looks good. Okay. Not too bad. What I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this set for a few minutes. I'm going to let that CA set up, and then we'll come back and we'll finish our pen assembly. My pen has been sitting long enough for the CA glue to dry, so let's go ahead and install the ink cartridge. Then we can test it. That looks pretty good to me. We'll get our trim ring installed. There we go. I think it looks better that way. Put the top half of the pen on. And there you have it. A Corian and Sapele Ink Pen. I had a great time making this one. It was a lot of fun. Well, everybody, I had a plan when I started, and it didn't work out exactly like I thought it would. We had to make some adjustments along the way, but we adapted, and I'm real happy with how things turned out. I mean, I've had this idea forever, and finally I was able to put it together. The pen looks great. It works great. The nib comes right out, or the ink comes right out. You can see it's a nice distance. It fully retracts. I've got a nice transition from the nib to my blank. Center band looks great, and the cap. I was a little fat on the shoulder of the cap, but it worked out perfect because I was able to press it in, and it's holding the clip nice and tight. The clip is not moving at all, so I'm very, very happy with that. I'll throw up a picture at the end of the video so you can get a better look at the pen. I know it's kind of dark. It's about 9:30, quarter till 10 at night. I want to let you guys know a few things. First off, if you like this video, please consider sharing it. It helps me by bringing new people to my channel who might not otherwise get to see some of the things I do. Give me a thumbs up. Give me a like. Share this on your other social medias. Speaking of social media, I want to let you guys know I am now on Instagram. You can find me at RJBWoodTurner. I also have a second channel that I've been doing for a while. I call it Whatcha Doin Bob, and I'll put the spelling up on the screen. And what it is, it's kind of almost a daily vlog of what I do. And when I'm working in the shop, I'll shoot a little video. Usually they're about 5 minutes long or so, and I'll put them all together. And the next morning I release them at 8 o'clock, and you can see what I'm doing. It's probably right now about 80–85% shop updates, and the other 15% or so, 15–20% is other things going on, like, for example, tomorrow I might be working on my car, or I might be doing a little project around the house. So, you know, you can always kind of skip the videos that don't interest you. I usually publish almost one a day. Some days I might have 2 and occasionally 3, but like I said, they're 5-minute videos, generally 5–8 minutes at the most. So check it out. You might find some stuff you like over there. I'm on Facebook you can find me by searching for RJBWoodTurner, and I would appreciate it if you would check me out on some of these social medias. I want you to know that you are always welcome in my shop. Come back and see me again real soon. Take care, everybody.